Good morning, Unitarian Universalists of Sarasota and Lakewood Ranch, and visitors joining us this morning. I'm Beth Miller, one of the associate ministers here, and I welcome you to today's service, whether you're viewing it live here on Sunday morning or seeing a recording at a later time. Welcome. If you're visiting today, we're glad you're here and hope you'll come back. If you haven't already found it, take a look at the visitors pages on our website, accessible from the home page, which I think you're seeing on your screen right now. Follow the links to find lots of information about this church and about Unitarian Universalism in general. Sign up for our weekly newsletter called Contact and to receive the email invitations to many of our weekly Zoom offerings. And if you have questions or want to discuss anything with a minister, our contact information is also on the home page. Just scroll down to Pastoral Care and Connections, and you'll find out how to get in touch with us. Members of the worship team joining me in offering today's services are my colleague, the Reverend Bud Friend Jones, other associate minister here, our musicians, Don Bryn, pianist, and Robert Laschetti, music director, and some members of our choir back for the first time in a long time to record live with us here in the sanctuary. Kathy Cyrus, Jan Dorset, and Paul Lewis, thanks for being with us today. And of course, our marvelous tech team, Klaus Obermeit and Doug Caldwell. And I know that you will virtually join me in welcoming our special guest musician this morning, horn player Kelsey Ross. Ms. Ross is an active performer and educator, currently based in Florida as fourth horn of the Sarasota Orchestra. She earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in music from Peabody Conservatory of the Johns Hopkins University. Thank you for being with us this morning, Kelsey. I do have one special announcement this morning. Our Arts Council is happy to present a new member of the month artist, Rhoda Taylor. Rhoda is a fabric artist. She says, "I feel that I paint with pieces of fabric as I design my artwork." You can see this exhibit online by accessing it through the link in our contact newsletter or our church's website by going to Our Church at the top of the homepage and then clicking on the link for the Arts Council. And now we want to welcome our guest musician again and invite her to play the prelude right now. Thank you. Thank you, Kelsey. We light the chalice this morning in recognition of our second principle, in which we can covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And on this day before the beginning of Rosh Hashanah and the High Holy Days in the Jewish tradition, may our flame also burn in recognition of our fourth source, Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbor as ourselves. And now, this is a time in our service for all ages. Catherine Bonner is our Director of Religious Education, and she's away this week, so there won't be any intergenerational religious education program this morning. But here's something to introduce us all to the Jewish High Holy Days, which we honor in today's service. Because our Unitarian Universalist tradition came out of the Christian tradition that came out of Judaism before that, and because we look to 6 sources to help us understand our UU faith and how it calls us to live and be in the world, we often acknowledge and consider what the stories and rituals and rules and holidays of Judaism and Christianity can teach us. It's kind of like how your family today might look at how your great-great-grandparents lived, what they believed, what their traditions were, and the stories that have been passed down from one generation to the next about them and about the times in which they lived. Your family today probably lives very differently and has different customs and beliefs about the world, but your ancestors' lives live on still and have meaning, and some of the really, really basic things are probably still true for your family today. So, tomorrow begins the High Holy Days in the Jewish tradition. People also call it the 10 Days of Awe. It starts with Rosh Hashanah, which starts tomorrow, and it means the head of the year or the beginning of the year, and celebrates the new year in the Jewish calendar, which is a lunar calendar, different than the Gregorian one that we all use. The High Holy Days end 10 days later on a day named Yom Kippur, which means atonement, or making up for the wrongs one has done all year long. Families have special meals and rituals at home, and there are extra services in the synagogues with special rituals and songs. But the main focus of this holiday period is forgiveness, thinking about what we need to be forgiven for and how we need to forgive others. In thinking about forgiveness, it's really important to think about how our actions affect other people. Sometimes we don't realize or maybe even don't care if something we do bothers someone else. For example, if I play music in my house really loud and it keeps my neighbor awake, then that's a negative impact that I'm having on them by doing something fairly innocuous, but not being considerate of them. There's a very famous Jewish story called The Boat that makes this point. A number of people are sitting in a boat out on the water. One of the passengers decides to drill a hole in the floor under where he sits, and the people start to complain. He responds by saying, "Why are you upset? I'm drilling under my seat, not yours." Then the others remind him that they all are in the same boat, and while the hole may be under his seat, the water that comes in endangers them all because it will cause the boat to sink. Now, the man drilling the hole in the boat sort of has a point, right? He's staying in his part of the boat. But he's clearly not the only one affected by his actions. Thinking about forgiving others and being forgiven helps us to learn to consider our impact on others before we do things. I bet having this special time each year, the High Holy Days, for people to think about forgiveness helps the Jewish people to be more aware of their impact on others, and maybe helps them to think twice about things they may want to do in the future. That's something we can learn from our fourth source, Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. And now let's join Robert and the masked choir in our opening hymn, number 315, This Old World.
Shana Tova, to my Jewish friends, Happy New Year. I read recently that people often go to church for the centering quality that it has for their lives. That our lives can be so busy and so scattered throughout the week that on Sunday we can come together, we can worship, we can center. This church has built into the heart of our liturgy a centering time. And so I'm going to read words for centering, and that will be followed by a silence, a time of centering in silence, followed by the song that we always sing, Spirit of Life. The centering words I'm going to read to you are a Kol Nidre by the Reverend Mark Bellatini, a retired UU minister. And so, take a breath and listen and let these words speak to you. Let's set it all down, you and me. The disappointments, little and large, the frustrations. Let's open our fist and drop them. The useless waiting, the obsession with what we cannot have, the focus on foolish things, the pin-wheeling worry which wears us out, the fretting. Let's throw it all down. The comparisons of ourselves with others, the competition as if domination was the best name we could give to God. The cynical assumptions, the unspoken, shelved anger. Let's toss them. The inarticulate suspicions, the self-doubt, the preemptive self-dumping, the numbing bouts of self-pity. Let's sink them all like stones in the pool of this gift of silence. Let's drop them like hot rocks into the cool silence. And when they're gone, let's lay back gently and float on that calm surface of silence. Let's be supported in this still cradle of the world, newborn and ready for anything. Let us now be in silence.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from Radical Forgiveness by Linda Sutherland. Corrie ten Boom was living with her older sister and her father in Amsterdam, Holland, when occupied by the Nazis. She was 48, unmarried, and worked as a watchmaker in the family shop on the first floor of their home. For a year and a half, Corrie and her family were active in the underground, managing to hide and save the lives of many Jews who were sought for deportation to the death camps in Germany. Eventually, they fell under suspicion. A Gentile neighbor, seeing unusual activity at all hours around the watch shop, pretended to be a Jew in need of help, and Corrie promised to do what she could. The next night, Corrie and her family were arrested and placed in concentration camps, where Corrie's father and then her sister lost their lives. Corrie eventually was released due to a clerical error the day before all the women in her age group were slated to be killed. After the war ended, many former prisoners returned to their homeland, broken in body and mind. Corrie worked with others to establish houses of healing for these people. Corrie was somewhat surprised when people who had not been sent to the camps began to arrive, seeking healing for their broken hearts and minds. These were people who, when faced with a choice to turn in their neighbors and friends to the Gestapo or to protect and hide them, gave in to their fear and betrayed their fellow human beings. They had bought their freedom from prison camp and or death at the price of their own sense of right and wrong. This kind of wound is called moral injury, and it is one of the most devastating side effects of war. Corey ten Boom took them in too. No blame, no repercussions. Those who had been so drastically hurt by the actions or inaction of these people saw that they were in desperate need of healing as well and made space for them. You may stay here. We will live with you, garden and cook with you, deal with our own anger and feelings of betrayal in order to help you regain your sense of worth and integrity. Sometimes, even in the face of the most egregious wrongs, forgiveness wins out. Sometimes, against all odds, love wins. And now, as Kelsey returns to the podium, to the platform here to share the offertory music with you, I invite you to consider making a donation today, when we get off this Zoom, whenever you get a chance. The donate button is prominently displayed on our homepage, and we certainly could use your offerings for the health and well-being of our congregation. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Kelsey. If the congregation were present today, there would be some adulation, applause, or at least, waving of hands and telling you that we're glad you're here. So everybody, if you read this week's contact newsletter, you know that I've been struggling with writing this sermon. And you may also have heard me say in the past that I often preach the sermons I most need to hear, like this one today, on forgiveness. In our Time for All Ages, I told you about the man drilling the hole in the boat. I'm struggling with forgiveness because we have way too many people drilling holes in our collective boat these days. And I'm angry about that, as I know many of you are too, righteously and deeply angry. For our time of centering, we acknowledge the need to set it all down, to let it go, to let the disappointments and frustration and anger go. But how? And in the story about Corrie ten Boom, we had an example of one who did just that, forgave the most egregious offenders of her time and her place, those who turned in their neighbors for protecting Jews from the Nazis. If the new Texas anti-abortion law stands, we will see that kind of offense here in America as we did during the Salem witch hunts and the McCarthy area, people turning in their neighbors for trying to exercise their constitutional rights. I used to believe we were beyond that kind of authoritarianism, but that seems less and less true these days. So, I guess you can see the trajectory of today's sermon, where I'm going with this. Here is the Cliff Notes summary. We're living in an unusually dangerous, difficult, and uncertain time of pandemic. People are foolishly making the pandemic worse and prolonging this chapter of human history by decisions and actions science has proven to be counterproductive. We are angry. We need to forgive. But why? And how? That's where my struggle is. How? Friends, I know we're all over the map on this. Some of you are even more angry than I am and can't even imagine forgiving the anti-vaxxers and mask refusers. Some have managed to let it go already and are not holding on to the pain and outrage of this. Some have been affected very personally as family members and friends have died of COVID, and your grief is complicated and magnified by these horrendous circumstances and the choices too many people are making. Some of you have been spared any of that particular pain, and though being reminded of it might ignite some angst for you, I'm sorry, you pretty successfully keep it at bay. Some feel pretty safe being out in the world, certainly safer since being vaccinated. And some, especially those of you with serious health conditions, feel much greater risk and have locked back down at home in this new wave of infections. We're all over the map. But as a faith committee, I don't know any of us who have been on the front lines as essential workers in the hospitals or nursing homes and as first responder roles. We haven't been forced ourselves to experience the devastation of daily death, now mostly among younger people who made decisions that left them vulnerable. For these brave people, we are grateful. I can't even imagine how difficult it must be to watch so many people die preventable deaths after working through the unpreventable pre-vaccine deaths of the first year of this pandemic. I'd like us to just take a moment now to hold these people, those essential workers on the front lines, in the spirit of silent prayer. Thank you. However, this pandemic setback affects us, whether personally or remotely, we can understand the anger and the frustration so many are carrying. And we can understand the burden of carrying this, right? The burden, the extra toll it takes on top of the pandemic itself to be carrying those feelings. We need to lay that burden down, or at least set it aside. We need to lay it down for ourselves, though, not for those at whom we are so angry. We need to find forgiveness. And if we cannot find forgiveness, and believe me, I'm not sure I can, at least not yet. If we cannot find forgiveness, we need to at least work on cultivating a forgiving attitude. Cultivating a forgiving attitude. This is spiritual work. And like all spiritual work, it is a long-term, maybe even lifelong pursuit. The wisdom of the ages is in almost all religions, expressed by many ancient and modern philosophers, and researched by social science and academics since about 1989, all tell us that not forgiving, that carrying grudges, harms us. It does damage to our mental, physical, and spiritual health and well-being. And forgiving, laying down the burden of our grudges, letting them go, heals us. That's why we need to forgive. Not to let anyone off the hook, but to save ourselves. Forgiveness is pretty universally addressed by the world's religions. The Jewish High Holy Days that we're acknowledging today are all about forgiveness, drawing on the Hebrew Scriptures and the Talmud and the Midrash of rabbinic scholars down through the ages. This period at the new year is an annual opportunity to forgive and be forgiven and start anew with family and friends and one's God. Jesus, as reported in the New Testament, broadened the idea of forgiveness to include our enemies. He said, "Turn the other cheek," and told his disciple to forgive not just 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. The word Islam is derived from the Semitic word salem, which means peace. In Islam, forgiveness is prerequisite to having genuine peace. In Buddhism, forgiveness is seen as a practice to prevent harmful emotions from causing damage to one's mental well-being. Forgiveness became an academic area of research and study in the United States around 1989. And since then, there have been many studies done, books written, and articles published discussing the harm done by holding on to grudges and the healing effect of forgiveness. Dr. Fred Luskin of the Stanford University Forgiveness Project says this about what forgiveness actually is. He writes, "Forgiveness is a choice you make first and foremost. It is not about condoning what went wrong. It is not even excusing what went wrong. It is not saying that the wrong done was right or desirable or even excusable. Wrong is still wrong, and we have the right to say never again and plan to protect ourselves in the future. Forgiveness is about goodness, about extending mercy to those who have harmed us, even if they don't deserve it. Forgiveness is giving up the hope of a better past, accepting what happened, finding the blessings in adversity, remembering the beauty that still exists, making the choice to forgive and move on." Now, for me, this helps. It helps to understand that forgiveness is not about the other person at all. It's about me and my well-being. The bottom line is that holding grudges makes us sick emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. Forgiving helps to heal us. And it is really hard. It is really hard when the impact is as great as this preventable surge in COVID cases. So this morning, I can't honestly say that I forgive those people, not all of them. I've developed some empathy for some, for those who are genuinely afraid the vaccine isn't safe, for those whose entire race has been victimized by the medical establishment in this country, for those who have fallen prey to misinformation. I'm getting closer to forgiving them. Others, however, Those who believe they're strong enough to ward off the virus or heal if they get it and can't be bothered to protect others, not so much. And especially those who know better and perpetuate this misinformation for political reasons. I'm nowhere close to actually forgiving them. But I am working on it. I'm working on developing a more forgiving attitude, and I encourage you to join me in that. But how? Well, we each have our ways of learning. There are many books and articles, YouTube videos, and podcasts that address forgiveness and can help us and inspire us to develop that forgiving attitude. Google them and incorporate what feels useful, what appeals to you, what feels like it will help you to move in that direction. Here are a few tips that I've gleaned that have been helpful to me in doing some research on this. You've heard me speak about this before. First one is practice gratitude. Gratitude is spiritually fundamental. Open your heart to what and to who you have. It's harder to be angry, resentful, and judgmental when you're thinking about all you're grateful for. And we have so much to be grateful for, do we not? Next, work on managing stress. Stress causes chemicals to be released in the brain, which cause our thinking to become narrow, limited, and even hostile. We each have our own stress management tools. Use them. I sometimes forget, but when I consistently pay attention and use the tools I have for reducing stress, I do better. Another one is, if the story you tell yourself paints you as a helpless victim of circumstances, change it. Change the story. Sometimes our story is worse than the actual situation. The research I found suggests that stories of helplessness can lower our immune system and cause nervous system dysregulation. Changing your story can change your physical and emotional health. Give up expecting things from other people that they do not choose to give you. We think that education will change the people who choose not to vaccinate or wear masks. If they just knew the facts. Some maybe, but others probably won't ever believe the facts. I'm trying to let go of worrying about that. As I said, developing a forgiving attitude is a long-term project, but we need it for our own well-being, especially in these difficult days. I want to close the sermon with another quote from Dr. Luskin from his Forgiveness Project that offers some additional guidance. He writes, "To practice forgiveness, it helps if you have worked on positively changing your inner world by learning to be what I call forgivingly fit. Just as you would start slowly with a new physical exercise routine, it helps if you build up your forgiving heart muscle slowly, incorporating regular workouts into your everyday life. You can start becoming more fit by making a commitment to do no harm. In other words, making a conscious effort not to talk disparagingly about those who have hurt you. You don't have to say good things, but if you refrain from talking negatively, it will feed the more forgiving side of your mind and your heart. You can also make a practice of recognizing that every person is unique, special, and irreplaceable. You may come to this through religious beliefs or humanist philosophy, or even through your belief in evolution. It's important to cultivate this mindset of valuing our common humanity so that it becomes harder to discount someone who has harmed you as unworthy. You can show love in small ways in everyday encounters, like smiling at a harried grocery cashier or taking time to listen to a child. Giving love when it's unnecessary helps to build the love muscle, making it easier to show compassion toward everyone. If you practice small acts of forgiveness and mercy, extending care when someone harms you in everyday life, this too will help. Perhaps you can refrain from honking when someone cuts you off in traffic. Or hold your tongue when your spouse snaps at you and extend a hug instead. Sometimes pride and power can weaken your efforts to forgive by making you feel entitled and inflated so that you hang on to your resentment as a noble cause. Try to catch yourself when you are acting from that place and choose forgiveness or mercy instead. And if you need inspiration, it can help to seek out stories of mercy in the world by going to International Forgiveness Institute's website. There's lots of stories on there. There ends the reading. Good Words by Dr. Luskin, all pointing to our first principle of affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, Bud's going to join me up here for a responsive reading. The High Holy Days are about both forgiving and seeking forgiveness. We're focused on the challenge of forgiving others, but let's end with a moment of humble reflection on our own imperfect actions. Please join Bud in the response, "We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love." For remaining silence when a single word would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For those and for so many acts both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
Thank you. And now let's sing together our closing hymn, number 219 in our hymnal, "Oh, Hear My People." Our closing words are by the Reverend Leslie Takahashi. We return again and again to the season of forgiveness, and each time we come, we come bearing gifts, a grudge to relinquish, a hatred to extinguish, a hope that is bloated and distorted, a glancing word that has wounded. Each time we walk the road toward forgiveness, we mutter that we have been here before. When will we remember that forgiveness is not so much an act as an attitude, not so much a duty as a love we give ourselves as part of the ever-unfolding new beginning? We extinguish the flame, symbol of our faith, for today. May we tend it in our hearts until we are together again. So may it be. Thank you for being with us today. Our service is ended. Go in peace.